I have buried better men than the Duke of Blackmere and wept less over their graves than I did over his living face. And I will tell you why. Because I was there for the whole of it, and there is no one left who can. The last physician came down the great stair of Blackmere Hall so fast he lost his footing on the third step and finished the flight on his backside, medicine bag flying, glass bottles ringing across the marble like dropped coins. I caught him under the arm before he cracked his skull. He was shaking. A grown man of 60, a fellow of some London college with letters after his name, shaking like a boy caught out in a storm. "He is not a man," the physician said to me, and his voice had gone high and strange. "He is a beast. Let him rot, Mr. Rook. I will not touch that wound again for the king's own purse." Above us, from the shut room at the end of the gallery, came a sound I had heard on battlefields and hoped never to hear indoors, a low animal roar, half rage and half agony, the sound a strong man makes when the pain has finally outrun his pride. Then the crash of something heavy against the door, and silence. "He threw the basin at you," I said. He threw the basin at the wall an inch from my head, and then he told me that if I laid one more finger on his leg he would show me what he learned from the sappers at the siege. The physician was already gathering his bottles with trembling hands. "The wound is gangrenous. Do you understand me? The flesh is dying. If it is not cut away, he will be dead inside the month, and I would not go back into that room to save him if he begged me on his knees. Which," he added, cramming a stopper into a bottle, "he never would." That was the seventh physician. I had stopped counting the apothecaries and the bone setters and the old woman from Carrick who claimed she could draw fever with a live toad. 7 years he had been at Blackmere behind that door, and in 7 years the wound in his leg had never once closed, and neither had the other wound, the one no physician ever saw, the one that had put the first behind the door and turned the door into a wall. I saw the physician to his carriage myself. The fog was down over the moor the way it always was that time of year, the last gray grip of winter before the thaw, and the carriage lamps swam in it and were swallowed, and the sound of the wheels went soft and then went out. Then it was only me and the hall and the moor, the three of us that were always left when everyone else had run. I went back up the stair. Blackmere is a cold house even in July. It is a great grim block of northern stone set at the top of a valley where 2 rivers meet, and above it the moor climbs and climbs into weather, and there is nothing kind about the place except the memory of when it had been kind, which is worse than no memory at all. In the old Duke's day there had been fires in every grate and dogs on every hearth, and the sound of the young lords laughing down the corridors. Now there was one fire in one room, and the man in the room did not laugh and had not laughed in 7 years, and I kept it lit because I was the only one left who remembered it ought to be. I knocked on the shut door. There was no answer, which was answer enough. I went in. He was on the floor by the great bed where he had fallen trying to reach the bell, and I want you to understand that I did not see a beast when I looked at him. I saw Silas. I saw the boy of 19 who had shared his ration with me in the cold, outside a foreign city when I was a corporal, and he was a lord's son who need not have marched at all and had marched anyway, because his younger brother had a commission, and Silas would not let Edmund go to war alone. I saw the young officer who had carried a wounded drummer 2 miles on his back rather than leave him. I saw the friend who had stood up at my own poor wedding, the only gentleman in a room of laborers, and drunk the health of a steward's bride as though she were a queen. That is who I saw on the floor. But I will not lie to you about what the world saw, because the world seeing is the whole of this story. The left side of his face was burned. It had happened in the same hour the leg was ruined, when the powder store went up and took half the men around him and took Edmund, and the fire had reached across Silas's cheek and jaw, and left it a landscape of scar, shining and pulled. The eye on that side dragged a little at the corner. He was still a big man, broad through the shoulder, dark-haired, and the right side of his face was the face of the handsome young officer who had turned every head at the assembly rooms before the war. but no one looked at the right side. The world looked at the left side and could not stop looking and could not bear to look. And that, more than the leg, more than the poison in his blood, was what had put him behind the door. "Get up," I told him, and got my shoulder under his arm. "Leave me on the floor, Rook." His voice was ash. "It is a good place for a man of my quality. You weigh as much as a plow horse, and I am not as young as I was. Get up, or we both stay here, and I will have to explain to the cook why the master and the steward were found dead of the cold in an embrace." That got the ghost of something out of him. Not a laugh. He had no laughs left. But the corner of his mouth that could still move moved, and he got his good leg under him, and between us we got him into the chair by the fire. His face was gray and running with sweat, and I could smell the wound through the bandages, the sweet-rotten smell that I knew from the field hospitals, the smell of a body eating itself. I unwrapped the leg. I had done it 100 times, and it never got easier. The physician had not lied. The flesh above the old wound had gone dark, and there were red lines climbing from it toward the knee like roots seeking the heart. "You threw a basin at a man who came 4 days over bad roads to help you," I said, to have something to say. "He came to cut my leg off." The Duke's head was back against the chair, his eyes shut. And when he had done that, he would go back to London and dine out for a year on the tale of the monster of Blackmere and how he sawed the monster's leg off while it howled. I have given the county enough to talk of, Rook. I will not give them that. You will give them a funeral instead. Yes, he said it without any weight at all, the way a man agrees that it is raining. I expect I will. I stood there with the foul bandage in my hands, and I felt something in my chest go over, the way a wall goes over slowly and then all at once, because he meant it. He had meant it for a long time, I think. He was not a man who would ever have done the coward's thing and hastened it. His code held there, whatever else it had let go. But he had decided to die the slow way, the way that could be called God's will and not his own, and he had decided it years ago. And everything since had only been the waiting. I was 51 years old that winter, and I had followed that man across 2 countries and buried his brother in foreign ground with my own hands because Silas could not stand, and I had not once, in all of it, argued with him about anything that mattered. I argued now. "There is one more," I said. He did not open his eyes. "One more what?" "One more that can be sent for, not a London man, not a college man." I wrapped his leg back up clean, my hands not quite steady. "Down in Wetherby there is a woman keeps the still room for half the Dale. Reed, her name is. Her mother had it before her and her grandmother before that. When my Bess was dying of the lung fever, no doctor in the county would come out to a steward's wife in the winter. And old Mother Reed came up the moor in the snow on her own 2 feet and sat 3 nights with her, and Bess had 4 more good years she would not have had. For years, Silas, because a woman who owed us nothing walked up the moor in the snow." Now he opened his eyes. They were very dark and there was nothing in them at all, which was the thing I could never get used to. "Your Bess died anyway." "Everyone dies anyway," I said. "The question is whether they die alone in a shut room having thrown a basin at the last person who tried." For a long time he said nothing. The fire ticked. Out on the moor the wind had got up and was worrying at the windows, and somewhere below a shutter banged and banged. He looked into the fire with the ruined side of his face turned toward me, which he never did on purpose, and I understood that he had forgotten to hide it, and that this was as close to defeated as I had ever seen him. "The Reed woman is dead," he said at last. "Your mother Reed, she died the winter before last. I know because the parish came to me for the cost of the coffin, and I paid it and never asked why, and it was only after that Mrs. Hale told me who it had been." "She had a daughter," I said. "The daughter has the still room now. They say she is better than her mother was." He shut his eyes again, and then he said the thing that I hung the rest of my hope on, the smallest thing, a word so quiet I almost missed it under the wind. "No basin," he said. I will not throw a basin at your Bess's friend's girl, that much I can promise you. Send for her if you must. She will run like the rest inside a day, and then you will let me be. I sent for her that night. Her name was Constance, and she came up the moor on foot the next afternoon with a wicker basket over her arm and no fear in her at all that I could see. And the first thing she did when I opened the great door to her was look at me for a long, level moment and say, "You are Mr. Rook. My mother spoke of you. She said you carried her over the beck at Ling Gill when the water was too high, on your back, an old woman, and never once complained of it." "I don't recall that I was old then," I said. She was. A small warmth came into her face there and gone. "Older than you thought a person could be and still walk the dale. She said you were kind. She was not free with that word. She was not what I had pictured. I had pictured, I suppose, a woman like her mother, bent and brown and ancient. Constance Reed was perhaps 25. She had a plain gray wool gown, mended at the cuff where she must have caught it on brambles 100 times, and a plain white cap, and under the cap dark hair pulled back sensibly out of the way of work, with a few strands escaped and curling at her temple from the damp. Her face was not the face they paint. It was better than that. It was a calm, wide-browed, steady face with gray eyes that took a room in all at once and gave nothing back until it had decided, and a mouth that looked as though it smiled seldom but meant it every time. Her hands, when she set down the basket and pulled off her gloves, were a working woman's hands, the nails cut short, a burned scar of her own, old and white, along one thumb. "I am told there is a wound that will not heal," she said. 7 years, in the leg, and that the last physician who saw it said it must come off." "Who told you that?" "The physician. He stopped at the inn at Weatherby to wait out the fog, and he told the whole taproom of the monster of Blackmere who threw a basin at him, and how the leg was rotting and the man would be dead in a month and good riddance." She was drawing things from her basket now onto the hall table with a quick sureness, bundles of dried herbs tied with thread, a stone jar sealed with wax, folded linen, a small horn box. She did not look up from her work. I did not care for the way he told it. A man who cannot save a patient might at least not sell the patient's death for the price of his supper. I liked her then. I will not pretend I did not. "Miss Reed," I said, "I must be plain with you because your mother was good to mine, and I will not repay it by sending you into a room blind. He is not gentle. The wound has been in him a long time, and the pain has made him hard, and there is another hurt in him older than the wound, and he does not want to be helped. He has said he will not throw a basin at you. That is the whole of what he has promised. He may say things to you that no woman should have to hear. He may show you a face that—" "I have seen wounds, Mr. Rook." She said it gently, but there was something under it, level as a stone floor. "I have seen the pox and the king's evil and children born wrong and men crushed under carts. I have laid out the dead and I have sat with the mad. There is no face in this house that will send me running, and I would take it kindly if you did not warn me again, because it does the master no honor to speak of him to a stranger as though he were a dog that bites." She looked up at last, and the gray eyes were steady and not unkind. "Take me to him." I took her up. I knocked, and there was no answer, and I opened the door, and the Duke of Blackmere was in his chair by the fire with the ruined side of his face to the door, because he had heard a woman's step on the stair and had turned it away, which he thought was for her sake and was truly for his own. The room was close and dark, the curtains drawn against the gray afternoon, and it smelled of the wound and of a man who has stopped believing the light will find him. "Your Grace," I said, "Miss Reed." He did not turn. "Miss Reed," he said to the fire, "you have come a long way to look at a leg. I am sorry for it. Rook will pay you for the journey, and you may go back down before the fog thickens." Constance Reed set her basket on the table. She crossed the room, not to the leg, not to the wound, but around the front of him, so that she stood between him and the fire, and she looked at his face. All of it. The whole ruined left of it in the firelight, the shining pull of the scar, the dragged eye, and the handsome untouched right, and she looked at both halves of him as though they were simply the two halves of a man's face, which is what they were, and she did not flinch, and she did not soften into pity either, which he would have hated more than the flinching. She just looked, and then she said, "That is an old burned scar, well healed. It gives you no pain now, I think, though it did once a great deal. It is not what I have come about. I have come about the leg. Will you let me see it, or will we waste the afternoon on your face, which does not need me?" I have thought about that moment 10,000 times since. I have thought that a lesser woman, a kinder-seeming woman, would have said something soft. "Oh, it is not so bad, your grace, you have suffered so." And it would have been a lie, and he would have known it was a lie, and it would have confirmed to him the thing he had believed for 7 years, that his face was a thing that had to be lied about, a thing that made honest people into liars, a thing that could not be met, only managed. And he would have turned her out with the rest. She did not lie to him. She told him his face did not need her. She told him the truth, which was that the scar was old and healed and beside the point. And in telling him the truth, she did the one thing no one had done in 7 years. She looked away from the thing everyone looked at, and toward the thing that could actually be helped. For a moment he could not speak. I saw his throat work. And then he turned in the chair slowly, the whole of his face coming round into the light where she could see it, an act I had not seen him perform for any living soul, and he looked at her, and he said, in a voice I barely knew, "You are not afraid." "No," said Constance Reed. "Everyone is afraid." "Then everyone is a fool," she said, "and I have not the leisure to be one. Your leg, your grace, before the light goes." He let her see the leg. I will not tell you it was easy after that, because it was not, and if I told it so, you would not believe the rest. She unwound the bandage herself, and I watched her face as the wound came clear, and where the physician had gone pale and the apothecary had gagged, Constance Reed only leaned closer and breathed the smell of it in through her nose the way you or I might smell bread to know if it had turned, and her mouth went firm. "How long since it last closed at all?" she asked. "It has never closed," I said, because the Duke had gone silent and rigid the way he did when the leg was uncovered, staring at the wall, enduring. 7 years. It scabs and breaks and weeps. Twice it near killed him with the fever. The London men wanted to take it off from the first, and he would not have it, and now they have left it so long the taking off would likely kill him, and the leaving would certainly kill him, and they have decided to call that his fault. She had my measure and the physician's measure in a sentence. She was pressing gently at the flesh above the wound, watching the dark skin, her short-nailed thumb reading the leg like a page. "There is dead flesh here and poison under it, and it must come out, but not with a saw. A saw is a coward's tool, quick, so the surgeon need not stay in the room long with what he has done. I do not use one. I will draw it and cut it a little at a time, and it will take weeks, and it will hurt him, and he will want to throw a basin at me." She glanced up at the Duke. "You will not, though." "How do you know what I will do?" said the Duke. "Because a basin is thrown by a man who has given up," said Constance Reed, "and a man who has given up does not refuse the saw for 7 years. You have not given up, your grace, whatever you have told Mr. Rook and whatever you have told yourself. A man who had given up would have let them take the leg and be done. You have kept it in agony for 7 years, because some part of you means to stand on it again. I am here to help that part win." The Duke of Blackmere looked at her for a long, long moment. "You are impertinent," he said. "I am your servant's friend's daughter come up the moor in the cold to save your life," she said, "and I have no time to be anything else. Mr. Rook, I shall need boiling water and clean linen and the fire built up, and a strong table brought near the light. And bread. He has not eaten today, I can see it in his color. A man cannot mend on an empty belly. Bread and broth if the cook has it, and if the cook has run off with the rest of the household, then I shall make the broth myself, for I have done it before." The cook had not run off. There were 3 of us left by then who had not run off, the cook, Mrs. Hale, and myself, and I went down and told Mrs. Hale that the Reed girl was staying and needed broth, and Mrs. Hale, who had wept in the pantry more nights than I could count over the ruin of the house she had come to as a girl of 14, sat down on the flour bin and put her apron over her face and cried, but this time not from grief. "Somebody's come," she said through the apron. "Somebody's come and she's not run. Oh, Nathaniel, somebody's come." That first evening Constance Reed cleaned the wound properly for the first time in 7 years, and it took 2 hours, and the Duke of Blackmere bore it with his jaw set and his eyes on the wall and the sweat pouring off him, and he did not throw a basin and he did not roar, and once, only once, when she had to cut away a strip of the dead flesh and he could not help the sound that came out of him, she stopped and put her clean hand flat against his knee above the wound and said, "There. That is the worst of tonight. It is over, breathe." And he breathed and she went on. And I stood in the corner with the basin of bloodied water and I thought, he let her touch his face with the truth, and now he has let her touch his knee, and in 7 years I have not once dared do either. When it was done she bound it in linen soaked in something from her stone jar that smelled green and sharp and clean, an honest smell that cut through the rot like a window opened. And she washed her hands and her arms to the elbow, and she made him eat the broth, standing over him until he did. And then she said she would sleep in the still room if there was one, or the kitchen if there was not, and be back to the leg at first light. "There is a house," said the Duke. He had gone somewhere very far off behind his eyes, the place he went when the pain had wrung him out. "The steward's house. It is empty. Rook lives in the hall now, his wife is dead. Give her the steward's house, Rook. It is nearer than the kitchen, and there is a still room in it that my mother used, or there was." "There is," I said. "It wants dusting." "I have never yet met a still room I could not put right," said Constance Reed, "and I have met some that would have turned your stomach. Good night, your Grace. You did very well tonight. Better than the physician who ran, and better than most men I have cut. Sleep if you can. I will come at dawn." She curtsied, not the deep court curtsy of the ballroom, but a plain, respectful bob, the curtsy of an honest woman to a man she has decided to save, and she took up her basket and went, and I saw her out. And when I came back up, the Duke of Blackmere was still looking at the door she had gone through. "She is not afraid," he said again, wonderingly, as if it were a thing he could not make his mind hold. "No," I said. She looked at my face and told me it did not need her. "Yes." He was quiet a while. The fire had burned low and I built it up, and when I straightened he was watching me with an expression I had not seen on him in 7 years, and it took me a moment to know it, because I had half forgotten what it looked like on him. It was fear. But a different fear from the pain fear and the shame fear. It was the fear of a man who has been asleep so long he has forgotten he was ever awake, and who feels, far off, the first gray of a morning he did not ask for and is not sure he can survive. "Rook," he said, "do not—" He stopped. He was not a man who asked for things. "The wound will close or it will not," he said instead. "But do not let there be more to lose than there already is. I have lost enough. I cannot lose again. Do you understand me?" I understood him. He meant, I have loved and it was taken. He meant Edmund, dead in the powder smoke with Silas's hand 3 feet from his, close enough to see and not to save. He meant every hope he had ever let himself hold, all of it gone up in 1 hour of fire, and himself left living with the mark of that fire on his face, so he could never for 1 day forget. He meant, I am learning to want that a woman come up my stairs at dawn, and wanting is the thing that has hurt me most in all my life, and I would rather have the leg cut off with a saw than begin again to want. "I understand you," I said, "but I will tell you the truth, Silas, because you are my friend and I have earned the right to it. You have been so long teaching yourself to lose nothing that you have lost everything, and there is nothing left in this house to protect. There is only a man behind a door and a wound that will not heal. If a woman coming up the stairs at dawn is a danger to that man, then let him be in danger. God knows nothing else has done him any good. He did not answer me, but when I went to draw the curtains against the night, he said, "Leave them. Leave the curtains open, Rook. I find I want to see when it gets light." She came at dawn, and she came the next dawn and the next, and the weeks went over Blackmere like the tide comes up a flat shore, so slow you cannot see it move, and then you look and the whole beach is changed. The leg mended. I will not pretend I understood her craft, I only watched it work. She had poultices that drew, and washes that cleaned, and a way of cutting a little dead flesh each day so that living flesh could come up under it. And she was right that it took weeks, and right that it hurt him, and right, above all, that he would not throw a basin. The red lines that had climbed toward his knee halted, and paled, and one morning were gone. The dark flesh slewed away and left raw meat that wept clear and then wept less, and then, I remember the morning. It was the first morning the fog lifted clean off the moor and let the sun down onto Blackmere in 7 years, it seemed to me. She unwound the bandage, and there was, at the top edge of the old wound, a thin pink line of new skin. Closed. A wound that had wept for 7 years, and it was closing. Constance Reed looked at it a long time. Then she looked up at the Duke, and I saw her face do something I had not seen it do. I saw it come open, all the calm control of it giving way to a plain, fierce joy, and she said, "There, do you see it? It is knitting. You will keep your leg, your grace, and you will walk on it, and any London man who told you otherwise may go hang." And the Duke of Blackmere, who had not wept where any man could see him since he was a boy, I know, because I was the man who saw him not weep over his own brother's grave, holding it all in behind his teeth until I thought his heart would burst. The Duke of Blackmere looked at the thin pink line of new skin on his own leg, and his ruined face crumpled, both halves of it, and he put his hand over his eyes and he wept. She did not look away from that either. She knelt there by his leg with the bandage in her hands, and she let him weep, and she did not fill the silence with comfort or with cheer. She only stayed, close and steady, until he was done. And when he was done and had wiped his face rough with the back of his hand and gone gruff and stiff with the shame of having been seen, she said, matter of fact, as though nothing had happened, "You will want beef today. The flesh knits faster with good beef. I shall tell Mrs. Hale," and got up and gathered her linens and gave him back his dignity by refusing to make a monument of his tears. I have never seen anyone do a kinder thing more plainly. But it was not the leg. You have understood that by now, I think, or I have told it badly. The leg was the smallest wound in that house. The leg was only the door. It was the talk that did the rest. She was in that room 3 and 4 hours a day, and there is only so long 2 people can be silent while one dresses the other's wound. And so they talked, and I, coming and going with water and linen and the beef Mrs. Hale sent up with tears in her eyes, heard it in pieces, like a story read to you across a room by a voice that keeps dropping. She asked him about the war, not the way the county asked, greedy for horrors to shudder at. She asked the way a healer asks, wanting to know where the hurt truly lived. And one gray afternoon, weeks in, when the leg was half healed and the sun would not come and the whole moor was drowned in cloud, I heard him tell her about Edmund. I had not heard him say his brother's name aloud in 7 years. He said it to her low, staring into the fire, and he told her about the powder store and the hour of fire and his own hand 3 feet away, close enough to see Edmund's face and not to reach it, and how he had lived and Edmund had not, and how there was no sense to be made of that, no justice in it, only the one raw fact that the wrong brother had come home. And I stood outside the door with a jug going cold in my hands, and I waited for her to say the things people say. It was not your fault. You could not have known. He would not want you to grieve so. God has a plan. All the true, useless things that are like a bandage laid on top of a bandage on a wound that wants opening. She did not say any of them. She said, "You loved him very much." That was all. And I heard the Duke of Blackmere make a sound as though something had given way inside him after 7 years of holding, and he said, "More than my own life." He was the best of us. He was the best of the whole line. If the fire had wanted the better man, it took the wrong one, and I have never been able to forgive it for its poor judgment." "No," said Constance Reed, "I do not think you have, but I will tell you what I have learned from sitting with the grieving all my life, your grace, for what it is worth, which may be nothing. It is not that you cannot forgive the fire. It is that you cannot forgive yourself for the crime of being the one still breathing. And you have set yourself to serve out the sentence, behind that door, in that dark, in that pain, because if you cannot give your brother his life back, you can at least refuse to enjoy your own. You have made your living into a kind of dying to keep faith with him. Have you not?" The silence went on so long I thought he would not answer. When he did, his voice was barely a voice. "Yes," he said. "He would hate it," said Constance Reed, gently, and now there was no matter-of-factness in her at all, only a great tenderness held very steady. "You knew him and I did not, but I know grief, and I have never once known a good man who died young and would have wanted the brother he loved to spend 7 years rotting in the dark on his account. That is not keeping faith with him. That is only grief wearing faith's coat. He gave his life. You are giving yours away after him for nothing and calling it loyalty. It is the one disloyal thing in the whole sad tale." I heard nothing after that for a long time. I set the jug down outside the door and I went away and left them, because there are moments a third man has no business witnessing, and that was one. But that night when I came to help him to his bed, the Duke caught my wrist as I bent over him, and his grip was stronger than it had been in years, and he said, "Rook, she said, I have been giving my life away and calling it loyalty. Do you think it is true?" "Yes," I said. "I have thought it for 7 years and never had the courage to say it." "She said it in an afternoon." "How," said the Duke of Blackmere, "does a still-room woman from Wetherby come to know more of my own heart than I do?" "Because she looked at it," I said. "That is her whole art, Sela's. She looks at the thing that is wrong. Everyone else looks at your face and cannot look at anything else. She looked past your face on the first day, and she has been looking at what actually ails you ever since. It is the same art she uses on the leg. She finds the dead thing, and she draws it out a little at a time so the living thing can come up under it. She has been doing it to your grief the whole while, and you never noticed, because you thought she was only dressing a leg." He lay there a long time in the firelight. "I noticed," he said at last very low. "God help me, Rook, I noticed. The trouble came from the south, the way trouble usually came to Blackmere, up the bad road in a good carriage. His name was Mr. Auberon Vane, and he was the Duke's cousin, the son of the old Duke's younger brother, and he was next in the line after Sela's, and he had been waiting on the news of the Duke's death for 7 years with the patience of a man who is very sure of his inheritance. He came, he said, to pay his family respects to his poor afflicted cousin. He came, in truth, because word had reached him in York that the monster of Blackmere was mending, that some country witch had done what the London men could not, and Mr. Auberon Vane did not like the sound of a cousin who was mending. A mending cousin might live. A mending cousin might, God forbid, marry and get an heir, and put Mr. Vane back at the end of the line where he had spent his whole life resenting. He arrived on a fine April morning with his own valet and his own physician, a smooth young man from York with soft hands and a soft mouth, and he swept into the hall as though it were already his, and he looked at me, the steward, with the particular contempt of a man who has decided a thing is his and finds an old servant standing in it. "You are Rook," he said. "You will tell my cousin his cousin is come, and you will tell me is it true there is a woman, a local woman tending him, living in the steward's house. Miss Reed is the healer who has saved his Grace's leg and very likely his life," I said. "She lodges in the steward's house at his Grace's own order." Mr. Vane and his soft young physician exchanged a look I did not like at all. "A woman," said Mr. Vane, "alone, in a gentleman's house, tending him for weeks, and no chaperone, no family, nothing but a what is she, a peasant, A wise woman, a witch, he smiled, and it was a smile with a knife inside it. My poor cousin. His mind was always the frailest part of him after the fire, everyone said so, and now I find he has fallen under the influence of some scheming country creature who has wormed her way into a sick and broken man's confidence, and I do not doubt, means to worm her way into his fortune. It will not do, Rook. It will not do at all. I have a duty to the family. I understood then, with a cold drop in my belly, exactly what he had come to do. He had not come to inherit a dead man's estate. He had come to inherit a living man's estate by having the living man declared unfit, mad, feeble, easily led, no longer competent to govern himself or his lands, and to have himself made the guardian of it. And a duke who had shut himself behind a door for 7 years, who threw basins at physicians, who let an unmarried peasant woman live in his house and dress his wounds, was a duke, a clever cousin with a tame physician might make to look very unfit indeed. His Grace's mind, I said, is as sound as yours or mine, sounder. We shall see, said Mr. Auberon Vane, what Dr. Nash makes of that. I went up ahead of them. Constance was with him, finishing the morning's dressing, and I said quickly, "Lo, his cousin is come. Vane, the heir. He has a physician with him, and he means to have the master declared unfit, mad, led astray, and himself made guardian. And he means to use you to do it, Miss Reed. A woman alone in a sick man's house. He will paint you as a schemer preying on a broken mind, and the master as too feeble to know better. Be ready. And you," I turned to the Duke, and my heart was in my mouth because I could see already what this would cost him. "You must be as you truly are, Silas, not as you have taught the world to see you. Do you understand? He will try to make you into the monster. You must be the man." The Duke of Blackmere had gone very still, and I watched with dread the old shudder come down over his face, the shudder of 7 years, the certainty that he was a thing to be hidden, a ruin, a shame, a creature best kept behind a door. This was the thing Vane would count on, that the Duke would agree with him, that some deep part of Silas would look at the cousin's disgust and think, "He is right, I am a monster, I am unfit, I am not a man who should govern anything or be loved by anyone, let him have it." Vane did not need to prove the Duke mad. He only needed the Duke to prove it for him, out of 7 years of self-loathing. I saw all that come down over Silas's face, and my heart sank. And then Constance Reed set down her linen, and she took the Duke of Blackmere's ruined face between her 2 working hands, the burned cheek in one palm, the whole cheek in the other, and she turned it up to hers and made him look at her, and she said, fast and low and fierce, "Listen to me. In a moment a small, frightened, greedy man is going to come through that door and try to convince a physician, and the county, and above all you, that you are less than a man. He has been half right for 7 years only because you agreed with him. Do not agree with him today. You are not a monster. You are a soldier who was burned pulling men out of a fire and who has grieved his brother longer and harder than any man I ever met. And grief is not madness, and a scar is not a crime, and neither one makes you unfit for anything. When that man tries to make you small, you will not shrink to fit his measure. You will sit up straight in your own house and be the whole of what you are, all of it, both sides of your face and the whole of your good sound mind, and you will let him choke on it. Do you hear me, Silas?" It was the first time she had called him by his name. I saw it land on him like water on a man dying of thirst. "I hear you," said the Duke of Blackmere. "Then be a duke," said Constance Reed, and let go of his face, and stepped back to stand at his right hand like a soldier taking his post. And the door opened, and Mr. Auberon Vane came in with his soft physician to find not a monster in the dark, but a man sitting up in a chair in the light, dressed, shaved on the side that could be shaved, his ruined face turned full to the door and unhidden for the first time in 7 years, and his eyes as cold and clear and sovereign as any duke's in England. "Cousin," said the Duke of Blackmere, "you have come a long way to inherit. I am sorry to disappoint you. Sit down. I wish I could tell you it was a great scene, a courtroom, a triumph with the county assembled. It was not. It was quieter and worse than that. 4 people in a shut room and everything at stake, and I have never in my life been so afraid for a man I loved. Dr. Nash was clever, I will give him that. He did not accuse. He inquired. He sat down by the Duke with his soft hands folded, and he asked, oh, so gently, so full of care, whether his Grace slept well, whether his Grace was troubled by dark thoughts, whether his Grace had, perhaps in his long and understandable suffering, come to rely very heavily upon those around him, whether his Grace found himself, at times, confused or fearful or given to fancies. Each question a small hook, baited with sympathy, and behind each one the shape of the report he meant to write. Feeble, fearful, confused, dependent, unfit. And Mr. Vane sat by the window with the light behind him and watched, and every little while he would murmur something to grease the wheel. You need not answer if it distresses you, cousin. We are all family here, there is no shame in it. You have suffered so, no one blames you. Each kindness a weight added to the scale of the Duke's unfitness. And I saw the terrible cleverness of it, that the more gently they treated him, the madder they made him seem, and that any anger the Duke showed would be proof of instability, and any calm would be proof he did not grasp his own danger, and any fear proof of feebleness, and there was no way through it that I could see, no way to be a man in a room where every human thing you did was written down as a symptom. And then Dr. Nash made his one mistake, and it was the mistake of a man who had never truly looked at the Duke of Blackmere, only at the report he meant to write. And this woman, said Dr. Nash, turning his soft face toward Constance where she stood at the Duke's right hand. This healer, she lives in your house, she attends you daily. She has, I am told, an intimate knowledge of your person and your affairs. Forgive me, your Grace, but a man in your condition, isolated, in pain, grieving, is so very vulnerable to influence, to designing persons. Is it not possible, I ask only out of care for you, is it not possible that you have come to depend upon this person more than is quite wise? That she has, perhaps without your quite seeing it, gained a hold over your judgment? He meant the Duke to be embarrassed. He meant the Duke to be uncertain, to say, well, perhaps, I had not thought, and hand them the doubt they needed. It is a clever man's trap, to make a man doubt the one person who has been good to him, in the name of protecting him. The Duke of Blackmere looked at Dr. Nash for a long, cold moment, and then he laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh in 7 years. It was rusty and terrible and wonderful, and it went through that room like a crack through ice. A hold over my judgment, said the Duke. Yes, she has. I will tell you exactly the hold she has, doctor, and you may write down every word. For 7 years the finest physicians in England looked at me and saw a monster, and dressed my wounds with their faces turned away, and could not heal me, because you cannot heal what you cannot bear to look at. This woman came up my moor on foot in the cold, and she looked at my face, the whole of it, the part your eyes are sliding off even now, and she told me it did not need her, and then she looked at my leg which every one of your college had condemned, and she healed it. In 7 years. In 8 weeks. That is her hold over my judgment, doctor. She is the only person who has entered this house in 7 years and seen a man where everyone else, including my grieving cousin by the window, and including, God forgive me myself, saw only a thing to be managed or inherited. My judgment is not held. My judgment is restored, and it tells me very clearly that the two of you have come 300 miles to steal a living man's house by pretending he is dead in the head, and that you have made one error in your calculations. And what, said Dr. Nash, but his soft voice had lost its ease, is that, your Grace? You assumed, said the Duke of Blackmere, that I would agree with you that I am a monster. You built your whole scheme on it. You were nearly right. A month ago you would have been right. A month ago I would have sat in the dark and let you take the house, because I believed, as you believe, that a man with my face and my grief is not fit to keep it. He turned his ruined face full into the light, deliberate, unflinching, and it was the most sovereign thing I ever saw a man do. I do not believe it any longer. Someone taught me otherwise. Rook, send to Wetherby and to the parish and to the magistrate at Carrick. Let them come and examine me, my books, my accounts, my letters, my leg, my mind, the whole of it in open daylight before witnesses. And let them examine my cousin's motives while they are about it, and the fee this good doctor was promised for finding me mad. I have nothing to hide. I have been hiding for 7 years, and I am done. Are you, doctor? Are you done, or shall we send for the magistrate? Dr. Nash was done. A tame physician is only worth his fee so long as the thing is quiet. He had no stomach for a magistrate and a public examination and questions about his fee, and he folded like a bad hand of cards. And Mr. Auberon Vane, by the window, understood in one gray moment that he had come to inherit a corpse and found a man instead. A whole man, sound in mind, sovereign in his own house, with witnesses to send for and nothing to hide, and a healer at his right hand who would swear to every hour of the mending. He gathered what dignity he had, which was not much, and he said something about being relieved, so relieved, to find his cousin so recovered, and family feeling, and how glad he was, and he could not get out of that room and down the bad road fast enough. I had his carriage brought round myself, and I confess I told the boy to bring the slow horses. When they were gone, truly gone, the sound of the wheels swallowed by the moor the way the physicians had been swallowed all those weeks before, the Duke of Blackmere sat back in his chair, and the sovereign strength went out of him all at once, the way it does when the danger passes, and he was only a tired man who had spent everything he had. And he looked up at Constance Reed, standing at his right hand where she had stood the whole while, steady as a stone floor, and he said, "You told me to be the whole of what I am. I have not been the whole of what I am in 7 years. I had forgotten there was a whole of me to be." "There was always a whole of you," said Constance Reed. "You had only put a door in front of most of it. I am glad it is open." And her voice was steady, but her hands, I saw her steady healer's hands, her hands were trembling just slightly, for the first time since she had come up the moor. She had been more afraid than she had let him see. She had stood there fearless for his sake because he needed her fearless, and only now, when it was won, did I see what it had cost her to be the calm thing he leaned on. And I thought, she loves him. She has loved him for weeks and hidden it under her craft, the way she hides everything under her craft, and she will go on hiding it, because she is a still-room woman from Wetherby and he is the Duke of Blackmere, and there are walls in this world that even she is too honest to pretend are not there. The leg healed. That is a plain fact, and I set it down plainly. By the green heart of that summer, the wound that had wept for 7 years was a thin white seam, and the Duke of Blackmere stood on his own 2 legs in the great hall of his fathers. And then he walked, with a stick at first and then without. And then one gold evening in June, he walked out of the front door of Blackmere Hall and down the terrace and onto the moor itself, out into the heather and the long light, for the first time in 7 years. And Mrs. Hale and the cook and I stood in the doorway and watched him go, and none of us said a word, because none of us could. He was changed, not healed, only changed. He had the surgeons of the county up in the end not to examine him for madness but to marvel at his leg, and he let them marvel, and he let them see his face, and he sat among them at his own table and did not turn the ruined side away, and one by one the county came back to Blackmere. Not all at once, and some for shame's sake, having whispered monster for 7 years and finding a man, but they came. There were fires in the grates again. There were, God be praised, dogs on the hearth again, a great foolish pair of moor hounds that Constance brought up from a farmer whose sow she had saved, and that took to sleeping across the Duke's feet as though they had always been there. But he was not happy. I, who knew him better than any man living, saw that he was not happy in the midst of all his mending, and it puzzled me, and it grieved me, until one evening late in that summer I understood. Constance Reed was leaving. The leg was healed. Her work was done. She had said so herself plainly, the way she said everything, that the wound was closed and would stay closed, that his grace had no more need of a healer, that she had a still room in Wetherby and a dale full of people who did have need of her, sick children and birthing women and old men with the winter cough, and that she could not in conscience stay on at a great house drawing a healer's keep when there was no one left in it to heal. She had done what she came to do. She was going home. And the Duke of Blackmere, who had faced down a physician and a scheming cousin, and 7 years of his own darkness, could not find the courage to ask her to stay. I found him the night before she was to go, in the long gallery, standing before the portrait of his brother Edmund, a laughing boy in a blue coat, painted the year before the war, before there was any fire in the world. He had had the portrait brought up from where it had hung its face to the wall for 7 years, and he had hung it in the light again, and he stood before it now in the last of the evening, with the whole of his changed face plain in the gold light. "She goes tomorrow," he said without turning. "Rook, she goes tomorrow, and I do not know how to—" He stopped. His hand, I saw, was pressed flat against his own chest, over his heart, the way a man presses a wound. "I told you," he said low. "The first night she came, I told you not to let there be more to lose, and you said there was nothing left in this house to protect. You were right then. There was nothing. And now there is everything, and it is walking down the moor tomorrow morning, and I have no more right to ask it to stay than I ever had. Less. She is worth 10 of me. She has a life full of people who need her. What have I to offer her but a scarred face and a great cold house, and a man who was a ruin until she mended him? What kind of gift is that? What kind of man asks a woman to bind her life to the thing she pitied enough to fix?" I looked at him, my friend, standing before his dead brother's portrait, and I found I was angry, in the old way, the way I had been angry the first night when he had agreed so easily to die. "You great fool," I said, "you are doing it again." He turned. "You are looking at yourself the way the county looked at you for 7 years," I said. "You are looking at the scar and the house and the ruin, and you have decided that is the whole of what you are, and that no woman could want it, and so you will spare her the burden of you by saying nothing and letting her go, and you will call it nobility, the way you called dying nobility, the way you called rotting behind a door loyalty. It is the same lie in a new coat, Silas, and it is an insult to her. Do you not see? You are deciding for her what she can bear to want, exactly the thing Vane and his physician tried to do to you. You are telling yourself she only pitied you. Do you truly believe that woman does anything out of pity? Have you ever once, in the whole of the summer, seen Constance Reed do a single thing she did not choose with her eyes wide open? She looked at your face on the first day and told you it did not need her. Do you think a woman like that would look at your heart and want it out of pity? She is the most clear-eyed soul in the north of England. If she wanted you, it would be because she looked at the whole of you, the scar and the grief and the house and the mended leg and the man, and chose it, the way she chooses everything on purpose, knowing exactly what it costs. And you will never know whether she does, because you are too busy being noble to give her the chance to answer. Ask her. Give her the dignity of her own answer, the way she gave you the dignity of yours. Ask her, or you will spend the next 7 years behind a different door. And this time I will not send anyone up the moor to fetch you out, because you will have shut it yourself with both hands over the one thing that ever opened it." He stared at me for a long moment in the gold light, both halves of his face bare. "You have grown very free with your tongue, Rook," he said. "I have earned it," I said. "You told me so yourself once. Ask her." He asked her at dawn. I know, because I could not help it. I had followed at a distance, old fool that I am, and I stood back among the beech trees where the moor road runs down from the hall, and I saw them, small in the great grey and gold morning, the Duke of Blackmere and Constance Reed with her basket over her arm ready to go home. And I could not hear the words, and I would not tell them to you if I had. They belonged to no one but the two of them and the moor. But I saw him stand before her the way he had stood before no one in 7 years, unhidden, the whole of his ruined and mended face turned full to her in the rising light, and I saw that he was afraid, more afraid than he had been of the physician or the fire or the death he had courted, because this was the one thing he had truly never dared. And I saw him speak. And I saw her stand very still and listen, the way she had listened to everything, taking it all in and giving nothing back until she had decided. And then I saw Constance Reed set down her basket in the wet heather. She set it down and she reached up. She was not a tall woman, and he was a big man, and she had to reach. And she laid her two working hands against the sides of his face, the burned cheek in one palm and the whole cheek in the other, the way she had on the day of the cousin, only this was not to make him brave. This was the other thing. And she drew his face down to hers, both halves of it, the scarred and the whole, and she did not flinch, and she did not look away, and she never had, not once from the first day to the last, and she kissed him there in the dawn on the open moor where anyone might see, and no one saw but an old steward hidden in the beeches with tears running down into his collar. And I turned and went back up to the hall to tell Mrs. Hale to have them light every fire in the house, because the woman was staying. The woman was staying. Somebody had come up the moor in the cold and looked at the worst of us and stayed, and she was going to go on staying, and the door was open, and it was never, so long as I lived, going to be shut again. They were married in the little church at Wetherby, not the great cold parish church of the Blackmeres, and that was her doing, and the rightness of it was all her own. She would not be married in the grand place where the county could come and stare at the Duke, who had married his healer. She was married in her own church, among her own people, the Dale people she had birthed and dosed and buried and mended all her life, the farmers and the shepherds and the still-room women, and they filled the church and spilled out of it into the yard, and there was not a dry eye among them, because they knew what she was and they knew what she had done, and they had watched her go up the moor to the monster's house, and they had feared for her. And here she was in a plain gown, the color of more heather, come to marry the man she had made back into a man. And the Duke of Blackmere stood at the front of that little church with the whole of his face bare in the plain light through the plain windows, no shadow to hide the scarred side, no turning away. And when Constance came up the aisle to him on the arm of the old shepherd who had asked to give her away, her own father being long dead, the Duke did not weep this time. He smiled. Both sides of his face, the moving and the ruined, and I tell you a man's face does not have to be whole to be beautiful, because his was in that moment the most beautiful face in the north of England, and every soul in that church saw it, and no one ever again in the whole of the Dale called the Duke of Blackmere a monster. I stood up with him, of course. He had stood up at my wedding 40 years before, the only gentleman in a room of laborers, and now I stood up at his in a church full of laborers, the only man there who had known him before the fire and after it, before the door and after it. And when the parson asked who gave this woman and who stood for this man, it was an old shepherd and an old steward who answered, and the Duke and Duchess of Blackmere seemed to find that entirely as it should be. He hung Edmund's portrait in the great hall after that, not in the gallery in the shadows, but in the hall in the light, where every guest would see the laughing boy in the blue coat, and under it he had them carve a line into the stone, and I asked him once what it meant, the line he had chosen, and he told me it was something the Duchess had said to him in the dark of that first spring, when he had told her he was giving his life away after his brother and calling it loyalty. Grief-wearing faith's coat, she had called it, and so under the portrait of his brother he had carved, he gave his life. I will not give mine away after him, but live it well in his honor. And I have stood before that portrait many times since, an old man now, older than Mother Reed ever was I sometimes think, and I have read that line and I have thought, that is the whole of what she healed. The leg was the least of it. She healed the man's belief that he had to keep dying to keep faith with the dead. She looked at the deepest wound in him, and she drew the poison out a little at a time, gently, for a whole spring, until the living thing could come up under it. That was her art. That was always her art. She found the thing everyone else looked away from, and she would not look away. There were children in time. I will not tell their whole story, for it is theirs and not mine. But I will tell you that the eldest, a boy, was born with a small red mark on his cheek, a birthmark, a mere nothing that faded near to gone by the time he was grown, and that the midwife, a nervous girl new to the Dale, went pale at the sight of it and did not know how to tell the Duke that his son was marked. And the Duke of Blackmere took his newborn son up in his 2 hands and looked at the small red mark on the small cheek and looked at his wife, and the 2 of them began to laugh, a real laugh, the both of them, the laugh of people who have come all the way through the dark and out the other side, and the Duke said, "Well, he is his father's son. Let no one ever teach him to turn his face away," and no one ever did. I am an old man now, and my tale is nearly told. The Duke and Duchess of Blackmere are gray themselves these days, and the leg troubles him a little in the cold weather, and the moor is the moor and the fog still comes down, but there are always fires in the grates and dogs on the hearth, and the sound of grandchildren down the corridors, and Blackmere is a kind house again, the way it was in the old Duke's day, kinder, and it was made so by a still-room woman who came up the moor on foot in the cold when everyone else had run. I have thought sometimes about the physicians who fled. The 7 of them, the college men with their letters and their saws, who looked at the Duke of Blackmere and saw a wound they could not bear to look at and a face they could not bear to meet and turned away. They were not cruel men, most of them. They were only men who could not look. And I have thought that this is the whole of the difference in the end between the ones who heal and the ones who cannot. Not craft, not learning, not the letters after the name. Only whether when you are shown the worst of a man, the ruin, the rot, the scar, the grief, the shut and bolted door of him, you can bear to look at it steadily, without flinching and without turning away, and say, "There, that is the wound, and I will not leave it, and we will mend it together, a little at a time, until the living thing comes up." She could bear it. She could always bear it. For 7 years no one had dared come near the scarred Duke's wound, and she sat down beside it and refused to look away, and that was all it took in the end. That was the whole of the miracle, not the poultices and not the washes and not the cutting away of the dead flesh, though those saved his leg. What saved the man was simpler and rarer than any of her craft. Somebody looked at the worst of him and stayed. I was there for the whole of it, and there is no one left who can tell it, so I have told it that it not be lost. How the woman they said was too low for him walked up the moor when the great physicians fled, and looked at the man everyone called a monster and would not look away, and how, because one clear-eyed soul refused to turn her face from his, the scarred Duke of Blackmere, who had made his living into a dying, learned to live, and was loved, and knew it. And at the very last, when I sat with him as he had once feared to sit alone, was not alone at all, but held on both sides of his face, by hands that had never once, in 50 years, flinched away.